On this episode of the show, I have with me Jeff Gibson. He is CTO and co-founder at Kintsugi, and we're going to be talking about solving business problems first. And we're going to talk to Jeff about, how he actually started realizing what's important, understanding flow of money, and kind of how he got into solving business problems and understanding what gives companies value. And he mentioned that he thinks sometimes solving boring business problems is actually a good thing, and we'll ask him about that. And sometimes you know what to build, but it's hard to build, and those are good businesses to try to build. Jeff, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Tell us all what Kintsugi does.
Yeah, so Kintsugi just solves for people who need to pay indirect tax. So people who sell things on the internet often sell across borders, could be city, county, state, country borders, and every jurisdiction has their own laws, and every jurisdiction needs this indirect tax revenue to, pay for schools, pay for roads, pay for their governments. And so it becomes an important source of revenue. And as more and more things are being sold on the internet, for example, e-commerce or software services, the complexity of it goes up, as well as countries and jurisdictions' desire to capture some of this revenue.
Absolutely. All right. Love it. I guess this topic, we're going to be diving into some of, the business problems that people try to solve. And you mentioned to me, you had a good, understanding and education on the job about understanding what's important, understanding the most important factor. And you mentioned that understanding the flow of money within a business is very instrumental. Love to kind of have you walk us through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if you look at any type of business, what's most important is revenue. Like, how do I generate revenue? What are my expenses? How does the money flow? When do I get my cash flow? And if you can understand these different points and touch points between systems and people and payments and things like this, you can understand, what's key to a business. Examples in a software business, do you have free users? Do you have paid users? What are your conversions? What is your churn? What's your net dollar retention? But it's not just when you have a customer that's ready to pay you, it's also understanding the funnel of what leads go into actually convert. Do you have complicated contracts? Do you need to do proof of concepts? What are all the things that get in the way of you getting money? And then also, how much of that money do you get to keep and recognize at the end of the day? And if you can map out all of these things in a business, you can understand what's helping or hurting you to grow. And so throughout my career, I've been in situations where I've been asked to do that mapping and asked to figure out what we need to do to grow revenue, to prevent revenue leakage, to improve conversions and things like this. And I think I've learned it's sometimes viewed to be like back office, right? Or it's like a little bit less, exciting. But some of the most important projects that I've seen inside of companies tend to focus on somewhere in this flow of money. And if you look at, the sales teams and marketing teams that are optimizing for this, and then the finance teams also making sure you get to take some of that money home, this is actually where a lot of the unsung heroes are inside of business.
It's fantastic. That's actually very true. You mentioned pre-IPO cleanup, and I guess for maybe some this will be a review. For some it'll be brand new. But obviously, you mentioned before a company can go public, there is some cleanup work that needs to be done, and that was some of your training ground for understanding more about how businesses execute.
Yeah, I think a lot of stuff in the news recently of these companies with 50 billion plus valuations who haven't gotten public. And there's more than just having a good market and a good time to IPO and get what you want out of it and have it be viewed as a successful IPO. There's also actually being able to do it. And I think people forget about this part. You think, hey, we have revenue, we have a good business model, we have a good story, Wall Street's going to like this. But actually, there's all these things you have to do to be a public company, additional forms of compliance, additional risks if you miss on estimates or targets. And so a couple of these things that come in is something called SOX compliance. And people probably wouldn't really think about this, but basically what Enron did was bad. And so a bunch of regulation came after that just governs how companies can talk about their financials and their forecasts and what they can tell to Wall Street. And so because of this, a bunch of things got put in place about having IT controls, having forms of compliance, how you state your revenue, how you recognize your revenue. And things got really, really complex. And so there's actually a ton of work that needs to be done. Most companies, most startups early on don't think about these controls. And so they're like, well, we got paid $100, so let's just count the $100 as revenue. But then, of course, like there's churn, or if it's an annual contract or there's milestones, you shouldn't really count that as revenue, even though you have money in your bank. Or if you have a multi-year contract, you can't just assume that that's always going to work out. And so making sure that what engineers build and how that affects revenues, what IT teams do that can affect revenue, having good policies around risk, being able to actually forecast and recognize revenue appropriately. There's a bunch of work, and it spans a lot of different teams: IT, finance, engineering. And so I've been in situations where I've worked on 3 of these projects, these pre-IPO projects, most notably for Atlassian, and just seeing what it takes to do this and what systems are needed and having to replace them or remove them. It's been really, really, really eye-opening. And that's where I learned just about how complicated it is to actually run a company that can actually have money flow very efficiently. It's a super hard thing to do. Building the product is, to some extent, is kind of easier. Getting paid and making sure that money is traceable and actually ends up in your bank a year down the line is the hard part.
That's actually very true. And I think, when you were talking about this, we were talking about understanding what companies value and then obviously being able to capitalize on that value. They're 2 different things. And sometimes, we do see founders, they do pivot. They keep trying to find that product market fit. And I know we toss that, phrase around a lot. I'm not sure that when I speak to you, you're the type of person that is going to search for product market fit and hoping to pivot till you find some. It sounds like you actually understand and define that business problem before you're going to run off and start actually doing the development. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you can do it both ways, but I think if you're just somebody looking for an idea to go after and you're going to change your mind every month or every couple months and maybe just do a complete rebrand, I think that can work. But in my experience, I think some of the companies I admire the most really, really understood a problem. They understood the value of the problem and they went after it. And I think when you look at new types of software and B2C software, something like a Snapchat or like a TikTok, right? I think there's a little bit more like art and science that goes into coming up with that and how to capture the market. But for a lot of B2B software solving business automation problems, you're solving a known problem, right? The complexities of taxation is a known human problem. You're just trying to automate it and build a business. Same with payments, same with billing, same with revenue recognition or managing expense management. This is a problem that exists, and you kind of know to some extent that every person needs to solve these problems if they're a certain type of company. I think you can identify them and solve them. And so those are the problems I really like to focus on. I don't want to search for an idea. I want to find a problem that exists that people have. They can tell me about the pain. I can ask them what would be better, and I can prioritize and build around it.
I guess that's an interesting, viewpoint of, when you do have massive, large-scale global adoption. When we're talking about social media apps that a billion people use, that's a whole different beast in of itself. When we're looking at pivoting, and I think the way you described it makes sense. And maybe I'll put it back a scenario and see what you think. I think if you're pivoting to find features that resonate, I think that does make sense. I think if your core mission is well defined and you pivot, I think it's okay. I think if you're pivoting because you're not fully understanding the business problem, right? And I think you might be, it might be a cause effect thing. You might not be solving the cause. You might be solving for a particular feature and not the cause. And I think that's dangerous because you're kind of just hoping you're going to run into a solution that fits some people. And I think the bigger businesses always have that quote unquote, that why, that North Star. I spoke to somebody, another founder, and he mentioned, they're in the laundry business, building a vertical solution for the laundry business. He said, we're not worried about laundry. We're worried about garment care. He goes, that's the actual goal. And you start thinking about that. You're like, there's a lot that goes into there. I mean, just, laundry is just one component of that. I guess that's my view. I was curious when we are talking about this concept of pivoting, understanding business problems. I mean, what are your thoughts? Am I close? Am I far off?
Yeah. I mean, I think you should have a thesis around, generally what your business should do and how to best meet the needs. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to build a feature that people don't like. People are going to tell you that, their dashboard isn't showing the right data. They don't want to see things like that. They wish it would work like this. They'll give you feedback, but I think ultimately the end goal of what you're trying to do, that shouldn't change that much. And then experimenting with different ways to provide value. I've built features before, which I thought people would be very excited about and would pay more money for. And they're like, I don't really care about that. What I actually would pay more money for is this. And, obviously having a bunch of conversations with your customers is, before you start building is good. But at the same time, people don't really know what they want until you show them something. Like it's difficult. You can do mock-ups, you can do designs, you can do prototypes, but at the end of the day, sometimes it takes a little bit more to get people to kind of imagine where you're going and to kind of get aligned. And so I think that type of experimentation makes a lot of sense. But if you're like, hey, we were B2B, now we're B2C, if these types of changes are happening overnight, or it's like, we serve this type of company, we serve that type of company, I think you don't want to go too far before you do that. And, I founded a couple of companies, and I think you can talk with 100 customers and you can figure out their problems before you can write a line of code. I think you can come up with an idea and you can talk to people and you can show them what you're thinking, and you can make sure that what you've come up with solves their problems. And even to the extent, I think you can put together a pitch deck and raise, entirely on an idea. And I've done that 2 times. And I think being able to raise on an idea shows that you really understand the problem and that you've been able to validate that if you build that thing, that people will buy it. And so I think there's a lot of healthy things that can happen. It can also save you a heck of a lot of time when you realize that what you think you're going to build, people won't actually pay for. So there's also this aspect for it too. It's like not just solving a problem, but solving it in a way where you can build it, make revenue, you understand your margins, you can think about how you go to market. I talk to a lot of founders with great ideas, and sometimes my feedback is, I don't think this is a viable business. Like, you should really think about how this can be a viable business before you spend any more time on it. And a lot of times they'll come back and say, okay, we're moving up market, which is the most common thing you see in SaaS. Other times, hey, we're just not going to do that idea. You're right. There's no money. And we talk to investors and they also have those same concerns. And we don't think that we can give them over the line. Or obviously with bootstrapping, you have a lot more skin in the game. So you really, really, really need to know that you can make some money off it.
Absolutely. And you said that, you mentioned businesses with low innovation are an opportunity. And I do see that we do have a number of, companies that try to disrupt that old model. We've even seen mattresses, right? Companies trying to reinvent mattresses, and we've seen success there. This idea that boring businesses are good places to innovate because there hasn't been competition. That sounds easy. Is it as easy as just finding something that hasn't had that kind of disruption and tackling it, or is there a reason that that could be a challenge?
I mean, it goes both ways. I think when you find industries with very low innovation, you have people who aren't very excited about it, and you don't always want to find a boring problem that's very commoditized. You want to find a boring problem that's also valuable. Like I'll give a great example, like QuickBooks or like NetSuite, right? These are products that over the years have had like limited levels of innovation or haven't quite adapted as fast as business models. And there's a lot of startups out there trying to build the next QuickBooks, the next NetSuite. And I do think those are great businesses, but I also look at that and I say, this is actually a very complicated thing. Be like, it's boring and it's clunky, probably for a reason. It's a very complicated thing. And so I think it's also understanding if you can build it. And so like building another billing system, building another ERP, building another version of Shopify. These are actually really, really hard problems too. So you should make sure that you can do it. But yes, if there's an area with very low innovation, for example, like you see like Brex and Ramp out there, that's a great example. You see lots of accounting software, that's great. More modern CRMs, right? Like if you looked at, Oracle CRMs or Salesforce 5-10 years ago, and you looked at this and you say, things are changing pretty rapidly. I think I can build something. Now there's AI CRMs, there's product-led growth CRMs. And I think that these are really, really interesting takes. They may not replace an incumbent, but I think there's a lot of different changing business models and you can meet those needs. So it's also looking where things are changing. You don't just want a shinier version of the same thing. I think you want something better for a specific segment of the market, or to look where a need's not being met. And you can always expand from there, but that's where I see the most success. Hey, these types of companies have these problems. They outgrow these tools, or these tools were always too big for them. We're going to go after that.
I like that. I guess to follow up on something you mentioned there, and I know a lot of times we hear, total addressable market. That's fine. You mentioned the example of QuickBooks. That makes sense. Is taking one of these ideas and really getting niche with it, right? Obviously, let's say we use QuickBooks. I don't know why we're picking that on, but it's a good example. People know it. I know other companies that use QuickBooks for a variety of reasons. It works. You can configure it. You have to pay somebody to configure it. It would seem like to me, if I was looking to find a problem to solve, maybe I look at QuickBooks for, I don't know, a particular demographic, right? Bakeries. And maybe it's out there, maybe it's not. And then try to really get super narrow on a very defined market, find those pain points that they have that they typically struggle with within QuickBooks that cost them money to find, and then go about maybe touching something there. And the reason I'm bringing this up is it might not sound like a business with a huge TAM, but if you certainly build a business that's doing well, has a good AAR, that's being consistent, that has value. And I don't know if that's something a lot of times gets discussed enough that we don't need, or maybe you're not trying to build that billion-dollar revenue business, because that is hard. maybe 10 is good, but it's super valuable and somebody wants it because of its depth. I mean, is that, I do see a lot of and by the way, caveat that I do see, actually, I've interviewed a number of them that have built these niche products, and I'm very impressed. But is that something we should see more? Are we seeing it more? I mean, your product itself seems like it kind of fits that world of it's doing something very specific.
Yeah, and these are great businesses. I think not every company has to be a venture scale business too, right? Not every company has to hit $1 billion in revenue to be a really great business. I think most people probably work for companies that don't fit that bill, and that's totally fine. And I think you're right. I mean, QuickBooks is interesting. And I wouldn't even pick on it. Like, for a product that you can sell to somebody for $40 a month that does everything it does, that's pretty impressive.
Absolutely.
I also think that that's dangerous because like it's $40 a month, right? So how much money can you capture? It's become potentially very commoditized. But yeah, QuickBooks for dog walkers or QuickBooks for furniture stores. Like, I think that these are pretty viable businesses. And because you have to be able to offer a specialized and premium product for what people do. And so there's like, in the world of indirect tax, there's a lot of different things. There's like hotel taxes and there's like fuel taxes and all sorts of things. And I think we're more focused around the consumption taxes, sales tax, VAT, GST. We know what types of businesses are underserved. We know that it tends to be companies below like 300-400 million in revenue that are underserved. Above that, we think that they're actually really great players in the space. We think that very small companies who have physical locations and don't sell online also don't have these challenges. So we absolutely we look to specialize. Hey, we want to be SMB. We want to really go after this market. We want to focus on people who sell things that are complex online, sell to a lot of different places online. And sort of for companies that don't fit the bill, we pass them to partners. So if you come to me and you're a giant company with very complex shipping infrastructure and warehouses all around the world, we'll just send you to a partner. And we think that they can do that better. And I think that's also a part of startups. You have to find somebody you can serve. You have to understand, what you can do well. And then once you get there, you have a lot more options. You have more money in the bank. You have more customers. You can experiment. You can try things out. But if you try to do everything first, it's not going to work out. So when we started, we primarily focused on like e-commerce and SaaS companies of a certain size who were selling on certain platforms. And once we figured that out, we were able to expand beyond, do more platforms, more countries, more types of tax. It's a challenging problem because I think when you're looking to get capital, people always want to see a huge business. And I think there's so many great businesses that just are never going to be venture scale businesses. And, so unfortunately, I think these great ideas get killed if you go down the venture route. And then the bootstrapping route, of course, is hard. Like, unless you've already, had a good exit or done something notable or built a great business before, it's also a lot of risk to do. A bootstrap business, you might find that you spend a couple years building, and a venture scale business has sort of came in, took your market before you could even get a foothold.
Yeah, that's great insights. And I think, I do think that it's a bit of a challenge for founders, right? Because if they don't have that venture scale business, VCs, the way the model is, might not find it appealing, because they do need to hit those home runs for their quote unquote bets to pay off. But as you said, founders could be building fantastic businesses if they had that investment. I know there's some VCs that actually skew that way. They have a different philosophy, but it's a bit of a chicken and the egg situation with what we're talking about, because they are these great businesses that just might not be investable by average venture capital companies, but also we're missing out on potentially very interesting, stable, innovative businesses in these niche markets. I don't know if there's an easy answer to that, because most of the market does skew that way. I guess when you, as a founder, are going to market, do you worry about that? Or have you, I know you've started a few companies here, but is that ever a concern, or do you just not worry about that venture scale component and just try to do what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I've only ever targeted sort of venture scale businesses, just because like sometimes it's easier to swim downstream than to try and swim upstream.
Yep.
But I also think cost of I think like a lot of things have changed in the market, which I think is going to give rise to more of these businesses that maybe wouldn't be quite as investable. I think number one, that just like global demand and ability to go to market globally has become easier. I mean, you can sign up for Stripe for payments. You can sign up for Kintsugi for indirect tax, right? You can find a decent billing system to help you sell internationally. You can find third-party fulfillments if you sell physical goods. You can do a lot to grow faster and grow these businesses. So I think there's ultimately like an element too of like how much you can grow a business, how quickly you can grow a business, where you can get into the market. I also think if you're building software, it's easier to build. I mean, like there's been a lot of innovations with developer tools, coding tools, AI coding tools, where you can build a lot faster. So one engineer in a room for a month can build a pretty impressive product to show and put out in the market. So you might also be able to get further with less capital. I know a lot of companies are trying to raise less early on because they need less to get where they need to go. So there's also these elements where maybe the amount of money you need to build and get something in the market, maybe things can swing back. If you need $100 million to build, $1 billion business, maybe people would be okay with $10 million to build a $100 million revenue business. So this is also, putting bootstrappers in a better environment as well. Just being able to be like, hey, if I quit my job for 3 months, maybe I can get some customers to pay me, $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month, and see if I can make this a viable business. The time to figure out if that's going to work is probably improving. I'm seeing a lot of very small companies do very impressive things. Obviously, like we started as a small company and we were able to grow really, really, really fast with less capital than, our competitors. And so like our existence sort of proves that like this is possible, but we are still a venture scale business. We have pretty significant backing from serious investors. So it's kind of always a balance. I think it's easy for me to say it would be easier, but also without 25 million in capital, 25 million plus, we wouldn't have been able to make as big of bets, grow as big, grow the areas we want, and expand to different markets as quickly, which may have made us less interesting to the market, to the media, to investors.
Absolutely. Very, very great insights. I was gonna say, I know you got to get back to Jeff, and you've shared a lot with us. I'm sure we probably have left open a follow-up question that I have not gotten to. Is there a good way of connecting with you if somebody does have a follow-up? Yeah,
reach out to me on LinkedIn, connect with me. I'm always happy to talk with founders, investors, people interested in the space. If you want to build something, or if you're curious, if you have an idea for a viable business, if I think it's a good idea or a bad idea, I talk to a lot of founders every week. So always happy to share and give people advice for free.
Absolutely. That's wonderful and quite generous of you. But thank you again for being on the show. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, 2 things. One, I think Jeff did a great job of walking us through how he approaches, looking for that business problem to solve. He mentioned kind of businesses he was a part of and how he showed value and understood what companies value. Talked about Kintsugi and how that business came to be. Being venture scale and finding the right VC partner obviously is very important. And Jeff shared a ton of insights to anyone who wants to be a founder. So if you're out there and you want to be a founder, or you are a founder, give it a listen, share it with somebody else. I'd appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment, let me know how the podcast is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.